The crack of Marcus's rib echoed across the silent savannah as the tar pit squeezed tighter around his small body. Blood bubbled from his mouth, mixing with the black sludge that had already claimed him up to his neck. His vision blurred as oxygen became a luxury he could no longer afford. Each shallow breath of victory against the suffocating embrace of liquid death. The vultures above had grown impatient. One bold scavenger landed on the rim of the pit, its razor-sharp beak tilting as it studied the dying elephant calf with hungry curiosity. Marcus could see his own reflection in the bird's cold black eyes, distorted and fading like everything else in his short life. The vulture took a tentative step closer, close enough that Marcus could smell the rotting flesh on its breath from its last meal. Below the surface, something moved against his legs. The skeleton of another elephant, probably a calf like himself who had met the same fate weeks or months ago, shifted in the tar as Marcus's struggles dislodged it from its resting place. The skull rolled against his belly, empty eye sockets staring up at him, like a prophecy of his own immediate future. This was how he would end, just another set of bones in this natural graveyard. His left lung collapsed with a wet sucking sound that made the vulture cock its head with interest. Marcus tried to trumpet one final call for help, but only a strangled wheeze escaped his blood-filled throat. The sound was pathetic, barely audible above the gentle bubbling of the tar as it prepared to claim its newest victim. His mother, Sarah, had died calling his name 3 days ago. Now he would die calling hers, and no one would hear either of them. The tar reached his chin, and Marcus tilted his head back desperately, trying to keep his nostrils above the surface for just a few more precious seconds. His trunk, once his most versatile tool, now felt like dead weight dragging him down faster. The vulture leaned forward eagerly, sensing that the moment had almost arrived. Marcus could feel consciousness slipping away like water through his fingers, darkness creeping in from the edges of his vision. That was when he heard it, a sound that made no sense in this place of death and despair. The heavy footfalls of something massive approaching through the grass, accompanied by a low, rumbling growl that seemed to make the very earth tremble. The vulture's head snapped up in alarm, its predatory confidence suddenly replaced by the wariness of prey. Whatever was coming to the tall grass was bigger than a hyena, more dangerous than a lion, and moving with the purposeful stride of something that feared nothing in this wilderness. Marcus's failing heart managed one more desperate beat as shadows fell across the tar pit, blocking out the merciless African sun. 3 nights ago, the world had tasted like sweet acacia pods and his mother's warm milk. Marcus had been nursing contentedly as twilight painted the African sky in shades of amber and gold, his small trunk exploring the familiar comfort of Sarah's massive belly, where his unborn sibling grew safe and protected. The herd moved in their ancient rhythm around the watering hole, a symphony of gentle rumbles and splashing water that had lulled Marcus towards sleep countless times before. The first gunshot shattered the evening like breaking glass. Sarah's body went rigid beneath Marcus, her milk instantly souring with the taste of terror and adrenaline. Before he could process what was happening, she had rolled in beneath her massive frame, her trunk wrapping around his small body like a living shield. Her heart hammered against his back as she pressed him into the red earth, and he could smell the fear pouring from her skin in sharp, acrid waves. The automatic weapons opened up like thunder from the tree line, muzzle flashes strobing through the darkness like deadly lightning. Marcus felt every bullet that struck his mother's body as a violent tremor that shook her entire frame. Her blood began to pool around him, warm and thick, soaking through his skin and filling his nostrils with the metallic stench of death. She never made a sound as she died, saving her breath to whisper his name one final time before her massive head settled into the dirt beside him. Across the watering hole, his father Benjamin trumpeted a war cry that made the earth shake and charged toward the killers with the fury of a freight train. Marcus watched through the gap between his mother's legs as Benjamin's enormous tusks caught the moonlight, gleaming like ivory spears as he thundered toward the men who had murdered his mate. The poacher's bullets found him before he made it halfway, punching through his skull and dropping all 6 tons of him into the shallow water with a splash that sent waves across the entire pond. His sister Emma had been drinking when the shooting started. She spun toward the sound of gunfire with water still dripping from her trunk, confused and terrified as chaos erupted around her. A burst of automatic fire caught her in the chest, spinning her small body like a child's toy before she collapsed beside Marcus. Her trunk reached toward him in her final moments, the tip brushing against his leg before her eyes went dark and her breathing stopped forever. The shooting lasted less than 3 minutes, but it felt like hours as Marcus lay trapped beneath his mother's corpse while his family died around him. When the guns finally fell silent, the poachers emerged from the trees with chainsaws and knives, their voices casual and businesslike as they discussed which tusks would bring the highest prices. Marcus held his breath as they worked, fighting not to vomit as the sound of metal cutting through bone filled the night air. His grandmother Ruth had fallen directly on top of him when the bullets found her, her ancient body forming a second layer of protection that hid him from the killer's view. Marcus had crawled out from beneath the mountain of rotting flesh that had once been his family as the first flies began to gather in the pre-dawn darkness. His legs shook like newborn grass as he stood among the corpses, their familiar faces now grotesque masks of death that would haunt his dreams forever. The metallic stench of blood mixed with the sickly sweet smell of decay, creating a cocktail of horror that burned his nostrils and coated his tongue with the taste of nightmare. The hyenas found his scent trail before the sun had fully risen. Their maniacal laughter echoed across the grassland as they followed him, always staying just out of sight, but close enough that he could hear their panting breath and clicking claws on stone. Marcus had never been alone before, never walked anywhere without the protective circle of adult elephants surrounding him. Every shadow could hide death. Every rustle in the grass might be his last sound on earth. Thirst drove him to a stagnant pool choked with green algae and the bloated corpse of a gazelle. The water tasted like liquid poison, but his body craved it desperately after hours of walking under blazing sun. Within an hour, violent cramps doubled him over as his stomach rejected the contaminated liquid. He vomited until nothing came up but yellow bile, his small body racked with convulsions that left him weaker than before. Thorns became his constant enemy as exhaustion made him clumsy and desperate. He crashed through acacia bushes that tore his tender skin like razor wire, leaving bloody streaks across his gray hide that attracted swarms of biting flies. His trunk, so skilled when his mother guided his learning, now seemed like a useless appendage that only found pain. Every plant he tried to eat was either toxic or too tough for his inexperienced teeth to process. His trumpeting calls for help grew more desperate with each passing hour, but they only served as dinner bells for predators that circled him like death itself. Wild dogs materialized from the tall grass when he called, their yellow eyes gleaming with hunger as they calculated the distance between themselves and fresh meat. A lone leopard tracked him through the second night, its spotted coat flowing like liquid shadow as it waited for him to collapse from exhaustion. By the third morning, Marcus could barely lift his head. His ribs showed clearly through his shrunken skin, and his legs trembled with each step. The hyenas had grown bolder, creeping closer each time he stumbled. They knew what he was beginning to understand, that his journey was almost over, and soon they would feast on elephant calf, just as the flies now feasted on his family. High above the savanna floor, where rocky outcroppings provided sanctuary from the African heat, Grace pressed her massive paws against her ears as the elephant calves' cries echoed through the canyon for the third consecutive day. The sound cut through her like a blade, awakening memories she had spent 2 years trying to bury. Her first cubs had made similar sounds when the Yellowstone hunters cornered them in their den, high-pitched wails of terror and confusion that had haunted her dreams ever since. Samuel paced restlessly at the mouth of their cave, his scarred shoulders rolling with tension as he fought his own internal battle. The bullet wound in his left hip still ached when storms approached, a permanent reminder of their narrow escape from the Montana wilderness, where men with rifles had turned their peaceful existence into a nightmare of blood and flight. He had learned the hard way that survival meant making brutal choices, and helping a dying elephant seemed like the kind of mercy they could not afford. Their teenage daughter Lily had stopped eating entirely since the cries began. She sat at the edge of the cave entrance with her ears perked forward, every muscle in her young body tense with a desire to investigate. At 15 months old, she had been too young to remember the massacre that drove them from their homeland, but something primal in her recognized the sound of orphaned desperation. Her amber eyes darted between her parents, silently pleading for them to do something, anything, to stop the suffering that filled their mountain sanctuary. Young Jake, barely 6 months old himself, whimpered and pressed closer to his mother's warm belly whenever the elephants' trumpeting reached their cave. The cries confused and frightened him in ways he could not understand. His world had always been safe, protected by parents who had learned that love sometimes meant choosing who lived and who died. The sounds from below spoke of a loneliness so profound that it made his small heart race with sympathetic panic. Grace's maternal instincts warred with the harsh lessons of survival as the elephant's calls grew progressively weaker each day. She had lost 3 cubs to human cruelty and would rather die than watch her remaining children suffer the same fate. Yet something about those desperate trumpets reminded her of her own voice calling for her murder babies, a sound that had echoed unanswered through the Yellowstone forest until her throat bled from the effort. Samuel watched his mate's internal struggle with growing alarm. He recognized the dangerous softness creeping into her eyes, the same expression she had worn when she first discovered Jake abandoned and starving after his birth mother rejected him. That compassion had nearly gotten them all killed when they took him in, and now it threatened to surface again for a creature they had never even seen. The elephant's cries were getting weaker, more desperate, and Grace knew that soon they would stop forever. Grace's decision came like lightning splitting the sky, sudden and irrevocable. She bolted from the cave mouth while Samuel's warning roar still echoed behind her, her massive paws thundering down the rocky slope toward the tar pit where the elephant's cries had finally fallen silent. Behind her, she could hear her mate's heavy breathing as he gave chase, and the lighter footfalls of Lily and Jake following despite his commands to stay hidden. The scene that greeted her at the pit's edge made her stomach clench with recognition. The small elephant was nearly gone, only his eyes and the tip of his trunk visible above the black surface that bubbled ominously with each labored breath. Vultures had already landed on the rim, their ugly heads cocked with anticipation as they waited for the final moment. One bold scavenger stood close enough to peck at the exposed skin, drawing tiny beads of blood that disappeared instantly into the tar. Grace didn't hesitate. She plunged her forepaws into the boiling hot tar, feeling it sear her skin like liquid fire as she groped blindly for solid flesh beneath the surface. The elephant's body was slippery and strange under her paws, unlike anything she had ever touched. When her claws finally found purchase around his ribs, Marcus screamed in agony as her grip tightened. But Grace held on despite the sound that tore through her heart like breaking glass. The tar fought her every inch of the way, creating suction that threatened to pull her down with her burden. Samuel appeared beside her, his powerful jaws clamping down on Marcus's trunk in a grip that would have crushed bone if he applied full pressure. Together they hauled the dying calf upward, their muscles screaming with effort as the pit released its victim one agonizing inch at a time. Marcus's first clear sight of his rescuers sent him into convulsions of terror. Bears meant death in every story his mother had ever told him. Massive predators with claws like knives and jaws that could crack elephant bones like twigs. He tried to struggle free even as Grace's rough tongue began cleaning tar from his wounds, his exhausted mind unable to process that these monsters were actually saving his life. Grace's touch was nothing like his mother's gentle caresses. Her tongue rasped across his skin like sandpaper, efficient and purposeful rather than tender. Yet something in her movements, some quality of desperate care, penetrated his panic and reminded him what love felt like. When she pressed her massive head against his trembling flank, he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with body heat and everything to do with the fierce protectiveness that radiated from her like physical force. Samuel's eyes met his mate's over the tar-covered calf, and she saw her own determination reflected in his amber gaze. They both understood what this moment meant. By bringing Marcus to their cave, they were risking everything they had built in this harsh new world. Their scent would be on him now, marking them as allies to any who might hunt him. Their sanctuary would no longer be secret, their safety no longer guaranteed. But as Marcus's small trunk curled weakly around Grace's paw in a gesture of trust that transcended species, she knew the choice had already been made. Inside the cave's protective darkness, Marcus pressed himself against the cold stone wall and trembled at every sound that echoed from the entrance. His small body jerked violently when Grace's shadow fell across him, his mind still expecting claws to tear into his flesh despite the gentle care she had shown. The nightmares from the tar pit blended seamlessly with memories of gunfire and death, creating a waking hell where every moment brought fresh terror. Grace approached him like she would a wounded animal, moving slowly with her head lowered to appear less threatening. Her own trauma made her understand his fear in ways that went beyond instinct. She had spent months after the Yellowstone massacre flinching at every snapping twig, every human scent carried on the wind. Trust was a luxury that survivors could rarely afford, yet somehow they both needed to learn again or die from the poison of perpetual fear. Her first lessons were wordless demonstrations of safety. She would lie down beside him for hours, her massive bulk radiating warmth and protection, while her breathing remained slow and steady. When Marcus finally stopped shaking long enough to close his eyes, she stayed motionless until he woke, proving through patience that some things in this world could be relied upon. Her presence became the first constant he had known since his family's slaughter. Lily watched these interactions with naked jealousy burning in her young eyes. She had been the center of her mother's attention since Jake's birth, the favored daughter who received extra grooming and the choicest portions of food. Now this strange creature with a ridiculous nose commanded more of Grace's time than both cubs combined. She expressed her resentment through small acts of aggression, stepping on Marcus's trunk when her parents weren't looking or claiming the warmest spots in the cave before he could reach them. Jake's reaction was more complex, mixing curiosity with territorial instinct. At 6 months old, he was close enough to Marcus's age to see him as both potential playmate and rival. He would approach the elephant calf with playful intentions, only to bare his teeth when Marcus moved too quickly or made unfamiliar sounds. Their interactions became a careful dance of approach and retreat, each learning the other's boundaries through trial and painful error. Samuel positioned himself as the family's watchman, his scarred body always between Marcus and the cave entrance. He studied every movement the elephant made, searching for signs of weakness that might attract predators or behaviors that could endanger his biological children. His skepticism was born from hard experience with the cost of compassion. Every extra mouth to feed meant less food for his cubs. Every additional scent trail meant more ways for enemies to track them. The bear patriarch's distrust was so palpable that Marcus could taste it in the air, sharp and bitter like the medicine his mother once forced him to swallow. Yet even Samuel's hostility was preferable to the crushing loneliness that had nearly killed him in the wilderness. The last water source in their territory had been reduced to cracked mud and the bleached bones of desperate animals who had died trying to reach moisture that no longer existed. Grace pressed her nose against the dried earth where their spring had flowed for generations, inhaling nothing but dust and the bitter scent of defeat. The drought had been merciless, turning their mountain sanctuary into a death trap, where every day brought them closer to joining the skeletons that littered the canyon floor. Samuel's voice carried the weight of command when he finally spoke the words they had all been dreading. The water sources higher in the mountains still ran, fed by snowmelt from peaks that humans had never reached. But the journey would require climbing sheer rock faces that only bears could navigate, paths so treacherous that even experienced adults sometimes fell to their deaths on the jagged stones below. Marcus understood his death sentence before Samuel finished speaking. His trunk drooped toward the ground as he absorbed the reality that his adoptive family would have to abandon him to save themselves. He had seen how effortlessly the bears scaled vertical cliff faces, their powerful claws finding purchase on stone surfaces that would crumble under his weight. His elephant body, designed for vast plains and gentle slopes, was utterly useless in the vertical world that offered their only hope of survival. Grace's maternal instinct ignited like wildfire when she saw the resignation in Marcus's eyes. She had already lost 3 cubs to human violence and would be damned before she lost another child to the cruel mathematics of survival. Her decision came without thought or hesitation, driven by a love so fierce it bordered on madness. If Marcus couldn't climb to safety, then she would stay with him and they would face death together. The confrontation between Grace and Samuel shook the cave walls with its fury. Samuel's roars carried the desperation of a father watching his mate choose suicide over sense, while Grace's snarls promised violence against anyone who tried to separate her from Marcus. Lily cowered against the far wall with Jake pressed beneath her, both cubs terrified by the sight of their parents turning on each other like mortal enemies. Samuel's final ultimatum cut through Grace's heart like a blade. He would take Lily and Jake to safety in the high country, but he would not watch his mate throw away her life for a creature that wasn't even their species. If she chose the elephant over her own family, she would make that choice alone. The silence that followed his words stretched like a chasm between them, filled with the ghosts of their murdered cubs and the weight of an impossible decision. Grace looked at Marcus, then at her biological children, and felt her heart breaking in ways she hadn't known were possible. The pack of wild dogs materialized from the heat shimmer, like demons born from the drought itself, their mottled coats dusty with dried blood from recent kills. 20 strong and desperate with thirst, they had been tracking the strange family for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Their leader, a scarred female with one missing eye, fixed her predatory gaze on Marcus and signaled the attack with a bark that sounded like breaking bones. Grace had made her choice at the cave, refusing to abandon Marcus despite Samuel's ultimatum. Now the entire family moved together through the wasteland, searching for water that might not exist while death stalked them from every shadow. When the dogs burst from their hiding places among the scattered boulders, there was nowhere to run and no time for the bears to reach higher ground where their climbing advantage might save them. Samuel's transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The skeptical father who had questioned every decision to help Marcus became a roaring engine of destruction, his massive claws ripping through dog flesh like paper as he positioned himself between the pack and his family. His war cry shattered the desert silence and sent several attackers scrambling backward, but the pack leader held her ground and snarled commands that brought the others surging forward in coordinated waves. Lily and Jake flanked their parents in perfect formation, their teenage strength combining with adult fury as they met the charge head-on. Blood sprayed across the sand as claws met fangs in a whirlwind of violence that turned the air red with mist. The dogs were fast and cunning, darting in to snap at tendons and retreating before the bears could retaliate, but they had underestimated the savage loyalty that bound this unlikely family together. Marcus felt terror freeze his blood as the pack surrounded him, their hungry eyes reflecting his own death in duplicate images of slavering jaws and needle-sharp teeth. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee from this nightmare and let the bears save themselves. Instead, he planted his feet in the sand and trumpeted a challenge that surprised even himself with his ferocity. His small tusks, barely visible nubs that seemed pathetically inadequate for survival, suddenly became weapons of devastating effectiveness. When the first dog launched itself at his throat, Marcus caught on his tusks and flung it 20 feet through the air, its spine snapping audibly against a boulder. The pack leader's remaining eye widened with shock as she realized that their intended victim had become another predator. The battle became a symphony of family bonds written in blood and sacrifice. Samuel took a crushing bite to his shoulder while protecting Jake from 3 attackers. Grace's left ear hung in tatters after shielding Lily from the pack leader's jaws. Lily's claws dripped with dog blood as she avenged every wound inflicted on her strange brother. Jake, the smallest of them all, fought with the desperate fury of someone defending his entire world. When Marcus finally drove his tusks through the pack leader's chest, ending her life in a fountain of arterial spray, the surviving dogs fled into the desert with their tails between their legs. The family stood together in the aftermath, breathing hard and covered in each other's blood, bonded by violence in ways that transcended every difference between them. The rains had returned to the savannah, transforming the parched wasteland into an emerald paradise where life bloomed in impossible abundance. Marcus stood at the edge of their mountain sanctuary, his body now strong and scarred from 6 months of survival alongside his bear family. The terrified calf who had nearly drowned in tar was gone, replaced by a young bull whose trumpet calls rang with confidence across the grasslands below. His growth had been remarkable under Grace's fierce nurturing and Samuel's reluctant but thorough teaching. Where once his ribs had shone through starved skin, now powerful muscles rippled beneath his gray hide. The small tusks that saved his life during the dog attack had grown into formidable weapons that gleamed white in the morning sun. Most importantly, the haunted look that had once filled his eyes had been replaced by something his murdered family would have recognized as joy. The approaching elephant herd created a moment that would define the rest of Marcus's life. Grace watched in the cave mouth as dozens of his own species emerged from the acacia groves, their ancient matriarch testing the air with her trunk as she searched for the source of the strange scents that clung to this territory. Here was Marcus's chance to rejoin his own kind, to live the life that nature had intended for him among creatures who shared his blood and his evolutionary destiny. Marcus felt their calls vibrating through his bones, the deep rumbles of elephant communication that spoke of family bonds and shared memories stretching back through generations. The matriarch's invitation was clear and welcoming, offering him acceptance into a new herd that would protect and teach him as his birth family once had. For a moment, the pull of genetic belonging was almost overwhelming. Then Jake's playful nip on his trunk reminded him where his heart truly lived. The young bear had grown into his best friend and constant companion, their games of chase and wrestling filling the mountain with laughter that echoed off stone walls. Lily groomed his ears each evening with the same gentle care their mother showed, while Samuel had begun teaching the subtle art of reading wind patterns and tracking prey. When Marcus turned his back on the elephant herd and walked deeper into bear territory, Grace felt her heart swell with pride and gratitude. Her trumpet of joy joined his own as they celebrated a choice that proved family was not about species or blood, but about the willingness to die for each other. Standing together on their cliff as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold, this impossible family had found something that war and drought and predators could never destroy. They had found home in each other's hearts. Stories like Marcus and Grace's remind us that the most powerful bonds often form in the most unexpected ways. If you found yourself moved by this tale of unlikely family and fierce love, please subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from the wild. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the amazing adventures that prove nature's greatest miracles happen when hearts choose to love beyond boundaries.